Back in the mid-2010s, when open-world games were attempting to fill their sandbox with more features to interact with, there came the abundance of bandit camps. Something to feel a sense of accomplishment, maybe a bit of immersion, interesting possibilities, of course. These were essentially small, usually optional territories where NPCs would attack on sight. This video is not a review of those elements, nor is it a study on where this gameplay feature originated from. Instead, this video will explore the time I thought a game was going to truly master this feature. The time I was ready for history to blend with a gameplay feature, more so than any game that'd come before it. The time I put my faith in Ubisoft to create a historically grounded game where the bandit camps, or gangs, were the center of their vision. It's in the name, Syndicate, as in crime syndicate.
As of this moment, you all work for us!
Was it a mixed bag? It's definitely something more disappointing. I know, I'm sorry to reveal the results so early on.
Lols, imagine thinking Assassin's Creed would have historically accurate gameplay.
Okay, understandable, but there's so much potential with this concept, and real history could have been used to craft a much more enjoyable experience overall. We'll take a deep look into Victorian London's gang and crime life, or what was then simply known as mobs, to see where Assassin's Creed Syndicate's inspirations came from, and then where history teaches us that there could have potentially been so much more. I really want to stress that this isn't a review. I'm not even covering the whole game, just the red, glowy areas on the map, more or less. Students ask me all the time what their history teacher's favorite game is.
Get out. We're here to learn.
Sorry kids, nobody wants that answer. It's Battlefront 2. Oh, did I subvert your expectations? Maybe you want to ask what game I think is the best historically grounded game. Well, we're in the right time period, but a little far across the pond. It'd be Red Dead Redemption 2, which, for comparison's sake, shares a lot of the achievements and flaws of Syndicate's gang features. But ultimately, the knockout is going to Red Dead in the historically accurate department.
You got tuberculosis. Really sorry for you, son. It's a hell of a thing.
Alright, what about other comparisons to historically grounded media that we could make? Well, there's strong Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes vibes. And, no one's gonna get this reference, but the game is basically trying as hard as it can be to be Gangs of New York, which is fine. This is fine. Honestly, I know games are a compromise. Nobody wants to play the realistic World War II sim where you unload boxes off a truck. But a few hours into the major boroughs, and you'll wish they cited their sources more. The show Ripper Street isn't bad. The attention to detail in Murder in the First Class Carriage.
Now we're talking.
But it's a novel. Let's start with the map. It's London, or at least most of London. What did you expect? This city isn't even where most of the more infamous gangs were based out of. Came here for Peaky Blinders with their class and sophistication. There are occasionally some weak nods to them, but you're pretty far off. Okay, how about the High Rip gang, who would often wait for their victims to pass by on street corners, then pull them into dark alleys? Try Birmingham. The police are pretty much letting them do whatever they want there. A Protestant group called the Rocks Push.
The Rooks!
Hey! They're actually looking for the identity of the internet historian in Sydney, Australia.
You're never good at chess either.
And rooks, that actually comes from the phrase rookeries, a slang name for the slums.
Slum mates, yeah, so you'll never be alone again. No, not with 10 people in one room.
But there's barely room to swing a cat.
Much like our main leads, we're off to a rocky start. So what well-organized and highly sophisticated or connected underground organizations do we have to draw from in 1868 London? Look no further than the 40 Elephants. Are you terrified yet? How about if I told you that this wasn't the Whitey Bulger and the boys kind of gang, but a gang of mostly women shoplifters?
I'm told it's the latest fashion in London.
Well, women in London must have learnt not to breathe.
Alright, tough guy. Before you go on questioning the gang's tactics, motives, and brutality, they are our first connection to the map Elephant and Castle, Southwark, our first investigation. Southwark's gang leader is Miss Plum, possibly based off of Alice Diamond, or maybe they wanted her to possibly be a play on words for Pearl Attaway. I say maybe and possibly because aside from their looks, it's almost impossible to tell who these historical figures are. Charles Darwin is caught attempting a break-in, and Charles Dickens is fumbling around about ghosts. More on these goons in a bit. What bugs me is that by the time you get to Miss Plum, she operates her criminal enterprise much like everyone else. This couldn't be further from what it actually should be. The 40 elephants scandalously stole from South London and eventually across the Thames most high-end stores for decades. I found plenty of sources that described how potentially violent these crimes would often become, and the horrific punishments given if they were caught. In one account, Alice Diamond had government officials from all across London paid off to keep her operations as undisturbed as possible. Their primary members were burly and fearless women who had plenty of reasons to raise hell. In Victorian London, women didn't have much social mobility or access to many public places, which left stores and shops one of the few places where they could wreak havoc. Look, I don't care if you write them in as Templars, but a few shoplifting infiltration missions could have been intriguing for stealth sections along the way. It leads me to my second issue, actually. Since the gang is represented poorly, what about their interconnectedness to other gangs? Does the game honor the Syndicate part of the game and explore how the 40 elephants were linked to their buyers, the Elephant and Castle gang? Not even a mention. In fact, the whole system hardly links the gangs or shows them interacting at all, because they're basically just one group with a few different local leaders. There's not even a mention of one member using the signature weapon of the day, the belt buckle. This damages Syndicate's representations of London's gangs to its core. In the first area, White Castle alone, there are dozens of gangs operating in different neighborhoods, each with their own representations, motives, and members. The city also barely changes in any meaningful way as you liberate sections, giving us choices with the outcome of the gang war, and we could separate or compare sources. Let us live with the consequences, and now we're evaluating them. So why would the game skewer these sources and serve its fans just a bland shish kebab? That leads us back to Charles Dickens. And here, we head back into the development room. An hour into researching Victorian London, and anyone with a computer will be able to foresee the biggest challenge of creating villains in this time period. Most of the gangs are made up of children. As young as 7 and as old as 18, these ragamuffins roam the streets causing all manners of hooliganism.
Oi, watch it.
Beg pardon, sir.
Oi! Come back here, you filthy dipper!
Stop!
Usually non-violent crimes, but occasionally things could turn ugly in a crowd. This instance causing the death of a 12-year-old girl. Another one here, 20 altogether, battling it out middle of the streets. Whether exaggerated over time, as some historians intend, or a true microcosm of the era, people won't buy the latest Assassin's Creed game if there's violent children in it. So here's where Charles Dickens really comes in. Many journalists of the day were well aware that immense poverty and lack of options created this deplorable environment. Many social investigators, like journalist Henry Mayhew, explained clearly that there may have been kids indoctrinated into gang lifestyle by so-called ladsmen. Perhaps these scoundrels could have been the real high-value targets. Then we would have more reasons aside from Templars up to no good to want to step in. Honest work indeed.
Disrupting the other workers!
With social reform being the goal here, we could have caught the eye of Charles Dickens.
Please, sir, I want some more.
What?
The 21st century clowns on Oliver Twist, but the man was one of the most popular writers of the 19th century, and his ideas went well beyond Christmas revelations. Dickens's work were mostly social commentaries on real examples of society's biggest faults. A man who used to stand on bar tables and sing songs about the plight of the poor. He'd make a powerful ally, worthy of more than a few side quests. Yes, I know the ghost hunts were a real group, but stop and think of the potential here for just a few seconds. Were sensational novels the only thing to clean up the streets? Of course not. But with the development of photography, I see the potential for a fun stealth mission trying to catch an unfolding crime. Then we could watch it blow up in the London Daily Post the next day. So the liberation missions don't change the world in any meaningful way. The characters don't really seem to care about the world changing in any meaningful way. Do the different parts of the city really change at all when you're at least traveling from section to section? Well, other than the higher difficulties and a few different buildings, it's hard to notice when you're entering another gang's turf. Take the Strand, for example. Crime's escalating here so high they place Scotland Yard practically in the middle of it. Are there any changes to the kinds of crimes you'll encounter? None at all. A real shame, since this is where most crimes happened in crowds of people as opposed to the neighborhoods across the Thames. Different sections of the city could have offered different dangers, thus creating a feeling that the city has more of a story outside of the Industrial Revolution barreling its way through. Maybe that's too much to ask for. A game is a result of a compromise, after all. Hang on a minute. I'm having a tough time understanding compromises when there's a random group of people playing a full game of cricket over here, and you're telling me we get three major enemy types. Engaging with different aspects of the city and approaching their diverse gangs in a thought-provoking way could have led to a complicated story about understanding and sympathizing with where these gangs came from, and ultimately, possibly, finding reconciliation regardless. There's more qualities here that unite us than divide us. That's the Syndicate I dream of. What about the other historical figures? Charles Darwin, the theory of natural selection, proved both him and Thomas Malthus wrong when you settle differences between two rival gangs ready to tear each other to pieces. Instead, we get syrup hunting, and the critics. Interesting choice. Karl Marx, on the other hand, is a bit more complicated. We first have to address that the game doesn't exactly keep an open mind when it comes to his role in history. The database sarcastically calls his work a real page-turner. As subjective as it gets, but I can live with it. At this time in Marx's career, though, he was trying to distance himself from the growing anarchism in major cities around the world. Could have been an opportunity to take on some vices in society, trying to use Marx's writings to spark a victory for the proletariat. They'd have a nice commentary on the nature of propaganda and the power of media as well. We're getting ahead of ourselves now. This game doesn't deserve a rant. They've even fixed many of these issues in later entries. Perhaps I've taken on one of the weakest aspects of the game and ignored what it does well. The city looks impressive, as is the way it captures the feeling of living in an overcrowded, noisy, steampunk jungle beckoning with stories to tell. With that in mind, let me know if you'd like to see me cover more aspects of the game, or another entry, or something else entirely. From the city's believability, or maybe the narrative. I heard the DLC was good. I could take a crack at that. If you want me to go over in more depth and even potentially destroy these embarrassing renditions of London's historical figures too, well, I suppose I could do that. I won't like it, but for you, just for you.
Well, what say you? You're not gonna like it.
No.